And welcome back, gamers. I'm Draxxinusam, and we are here playing the Dwarf Fortress Lazy Newb Pack. If you saw the previous video, we showed you which one we're going to be doing. Today will be World Generation, so let's go ahead and start that right away so I don't keep you waiting for forever. So, world size, we're going to keep it medium. Well, actually, a quick disclaimer before I get started. I'm going to do this as if I haven't done the previous video series. I'm going to treat it just like you're new to this, you've never seen anything, so if you saw this video in the other series or you're not very interested, feel free to skip ahead. So world size, we're going to do as medium. You can definitely do it as smaller and larger. It doesn't actually affect that much, except it basically creates how many civilizations you can have, which will affect things like how many sieges, how many caravans, and that sort of thing. So you don't necessarily, if you're new to the game, you don't necessarily need to change any of that. History, as you can see, it tells you, whoops, 1 second here. History, as you can see, it tells you right here how long the period is, 250 years. This will take a lot longer if you're on a bigger map, so that's something to be aware of. We're not going to necessarily change that because there's no reason. I mean, we can definitely do it shorter. It's up to you, though, depending on if you want historical events and that kind of thing. Number of civilizations, again, if you're new to the game, you don't necessarily need to adjust this at all. You're basically just changing the density of civilizations, and you're affecting, again, the number of civilizations and caravans and sieges and that sort of thing, which we don't necessarily need to affect on our first playthrough. Number of sites, this is basically, it tells you basically what's going on over here. It's sort of like distinct locations that you can go to on World Generation. Again, on the first playthrough, you're not going to need to change that. For the number of beasts, so beasts are there are two separate kinds of beasts in the world. There are mega beasts, which are like dragons, bronze colossuses, and other really big and scary things, like giant weregeckos and weird giant spiders and snails and all sorts of stuff. So if you want them to eat you a lot more often, you can set it to very high. If you're really afraid of them, you don't really have to be, provided you have your military going at that point. You can set them to very low. We're just going to keep it on medium. Natural savagery. So there are technically two kinds of savagery. There's a natural sort of savagery, and there's a evilness kind of savagery. The game will delineate it a little bit later on. It will be called how wild it is and how evil it is. But in this case, it's basically tying both of those in together. So we're not going to affect this either, unless you're actually seeking out evil. You don't really ever have to affect this. Even medium, the sites are usually pretty low at how many evil places that have zombies and necromancers and undead elephants and that sort of thing. And it tends to be pretty low. So we'll leave this on medium as well. Mineral occurrence, this is the one that I tend to recommend affecting. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory what it controls. You can set it to very rare, rare, sparse, frequent, or everywhere. We're going to go ahead and set it to frequent. We don't necessarily want stone appearing where we would prefer to want soil or sand or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and set it to frequent. So we're going to go ahead and hit go. As you can see, compared to the classic mode, things make a little bit more sense. Trees and rivers and that sort of thing, and bigger rivers, and eventually it'll add in roads and lakes. So it's not too crazy. You can see the little crowns, the little goblets, angry trees. Purple, you usually want to settle somewhere green. Purple tends to distinguish as evil, so this sort of gray area will probably have a lot of undead or hellhounds or something weird. So that is definitely something to be aware of. So basically what it's doing is it's going through generation, so it creates historical figures, people who've done something notable by killing some sort of beast or flipping off a god or something. So and then it counts how many people are dead to that point. So as you can see, it clicks over a year, and it adds in events and figures. For the most part, this has very little effect on your actual fortress, where it usually plays the biggest role is adventure mode, and then historical, I think it's called historical mode, where basically you can like relive those events. So it does have a slight effect on your fortress, just because it affects like if a mega beast that where you would have settled in was killed or not, or it'll affect whether people will be vampires. If you watched the last two of my videos in the old version, you would have seen that we actually had perhaps 2 vampires. So it's something that's very real, but for the most part, it's more interesting to note than anything. I've never actually done historical mode, and I do adventure mode from time to time. It can be pretty amusing, so. I could have set it to... See, whenever I do this, I always regret not setting it to a lower historical point, but I'm not going to go through and describe the terrain too much. I mean, unlike the other mode, it's pretty self-explanatory. Like, you can kind of look and tell what's going on where. So, I'm not necessarily going to get into that too much. So we might, unlike the other video, we might combine both the Embark portion and the actual terrain and fortress selection together in one. If you ever get bored of watching this, you can always hit enter or escape to either pause or finish, which we might do maybe around 200. We'll see where we get. Probably around 200, that actually sounds nice. There's a little dwarven guy here. Pretty awesome. See, and sort of roads connect cities. I'm not actually very familiar with this texture pack, so I can't exactly tell you what everything means, unfortunately, which makes it seem like, well, then why are you doing a how-to video? Really, the point is to get you familiar with the commands of Dwarf Fortress, not necessarily with the texture pack. This is basically to make it more visually appealing to you, the viewer. I mean, I will try and do my best to sort of communicate those sort of ideas, but I think that for the most part this will be a lot more self-explanatory than the classic ASCII mode. So, oh, and we are right around 200, so I'm going to tell it to stop. Of course I overshot it because it's doing a lot of processing in that time. So, and you can kind of see where the cursor is. It's pretty obvious. And so we're basically in inspection mode right now. All of this up here is basically glaciers and deserts and all kinds of crazy stuff. So let's go ahead and accept. So we will hit U, and the game basically says, okay, you're ready to go. And I will say, alright, perfect game, good work. Now we wait a moment. So the one thing to note when you're actually picking your fortress is there's a few things that you want to avoid unless you're out for a challenge. And one of those things, it even shows you in the Lazy Newb Pack, it's called an aquifer. And aquifers are basically, well, you can Google it, but it's basically a source of water. And when there is an aquifer, there tends to be not a lot of stones. And you can kind of see that in the like real world, where places that tend to be normal farming, and I don't mean like Tuscany or whatever. I mean like if you go to Kansas, for example, they have some rocks, but for wherever there's the most natural water underground that they tap into, there tends to not be that many rocks. So, yeah. So it can, and in Dwarf Fortress, obviously you're going to want rocks. So let's see. We will be in Region 3, so we will go ahead and accept, and these are the 3 settings I was telling you about. Door Fortress for Fortress mode, Adventure if you just want to be one guy out killing beasties on your own, and Legends if you want to review any of those historical events or figures. We are just after Door Fortress mode. I definitely recommend checking out the other 2. I've not myself done Legends, but I don't have any reason to believe that it would be bad. So, excuse me. So here are the 3 modes. This is basically the world view. This is local area view, and this is, well, I mean, I guess it says right here, world, region, local. So this is where you are on the continents. This is basically the more localized area, and this shows you the sort of general layout. You can move, you can navigate with the arrow keys, and you can navigate a little bit more locally with the U, M, K, and H. U and M are up and down, so U is up, M is down, just think of them as arrow keys, and H and K are side to side. So you can sort of do that, and as you can see, you can also view the biome. Ah, interesting. So we are going to pick somewhere, so there's a few things we want over here. So we don't want this aquifer, like I was saying. We want soil at some depth, maybe not very deep, because that kind of makes the fortress a little bit ugly. But wilderness, we don't really care about. We want heavily forested, though, so that's what we're going to be looking for. So we're going to look for anything that's a little bit darker green. And if you want, you can always hit F, which is this guy down here, to find desired location. And then you can sort of pick. And obviously, the more things you pick, the more it's going to sort of cut down on what you find. So temperature, we want medium or below. We definitely want some sort of rain. We don't care about that. We definitely don't want an aquifer. We definitely want a river. There we go. So we're going to hit enter, and it'll do a search. And as you see, it'll move through the world, creating X's where the areas that are excluded by our choices here. And it basically can kind of show you as it's going through why a location was excluded. It'll obviously like highlight it and say, well, we're excluding this because of this and that sort of thing. So what I'm looking for is kind of specific. So hopefully we won't get too shafted. It looks like there's so many evil places, but I don't want to settle in evil places. I'm guessing right there is probably going to be the best. What's over here? That looks like a swamp or something. Okay, so we have some places to work with. Not a ton, but enough. And you can always change this. X and Y dimensions basically involve this guy here, because you can see it's a 4x4. You can create it bigger, which obviously will exclude more things because it'll need to meet more combinations in order to meet your specific requirements. I don't like those. Temperature, hot. I don't want temperature hot. One thing to note is in temperature, there are basically 2 sort of things to make note of. Very cold and very hot. Those are the 2 that will basically kill dwarves. The problem with it is... Ooh. Deep soil, though. I'm not necessarily a fan of deep soil. One thing I highly recommend is to make sure that you have a river, basically this blue line passing through, basically as a source for fresh water. There's definitely other ways to do it, but for starting out, it tends to be the easiest way to access water in general. So. Nope. Let's come up here. Nope. Ah, man, I can't win. I'm trying to avoid deep soil, because deep soil will... Some soil. Ooh. We're right next to a place, but that doesn't really matter. So, We're fine with this. This will be our selection. And you can always change the size of your selection if you think you're a real cool kid. You can hold down Shift and basically do the same selections as the UMKH. It'll basically govern the properties in the same sort of fashion as the UMKH over here. So we're going to go ahead and hit E, which means Embark. Apparently it adds a warning. So we still have the definition that we made in the last video, but we'll go ahead and do another one just so you can sort of see what's going on. So you basically get 7 dwarves with a point total of 10. Each, you can add a total of 10 skills to any of these dwarves, and it'll take from your total down here, which is your point score. You can view and customize them with their name and that sort of thing. But basically, to navigate between these two menus is the arrows. So I can do up and down. It'll, as you can see, it's scrolling through these dwarves here. Right and left will switch between selecting the dwarf and then selecting between skills. And then up and down will also select between here. Plus and minus will basically add or detract from the whatever you've given them. So we'll go ahead and start this now. So what I recommend is having 2 minors. You never really need to go above adequate or even novice. It's basically up to you. But remember, every time you spend a point, the cost goes up. So as you can see, the point cost starts out at 5, and you can see the reflected amount here. But now it's at 6, because as they're getting more experience, it becomes more expensive to level them up. So if I wanted, I could take them, any of them up to proficient, but it gets to be quite expensive. So all we really need is 2 adequate minors. They'll basically get experience as they go. And I always recommend 2, just because in the beginning you'll need lots of dual skills. You'll need dwarves doing many jobs at once, and you don't necessarily want to bottleneck chopping into the mountain because you just wanted to make some rock blocks or something like that. So we're going to start with the main sort of skills, and then we're going to do with like supporting skills and that sort of thing. So mining is obviously a big one. So the next one is going to be wood. Wood is very important in Dwarf Fortress, so much so that you actually will end up importing a lot of wood. At least I do, especially if you don't have a fuel source like lava or bituminous coal or lignite, which are basically types of stone that you can convert into fuel. So if you don't have any of those, you'll either be importing them, or you'll just be turning trees into charcoal and using that, which can be very expensive given that things like beds are the only thing that can be made out of wood, so it can sort of affect your stockpiles. So the next most important thing is going to be a source of food. So we're going to plan for 2 sources of food. And the first one will be growing. So we will make an adequate grower. And then the next item we will make is... there it is. Will be a fisher dwarf. Just because growing is important, but fisherman is basically a good way to start, just because it doesn't take a whole lot of like setup. Pretty much as soon as you arrive, your dwarf can start fishing right away. So that's pretty sweet. So the next 2, we are actually going to do something very specific. So this will probably be pretty general across the board, and if you have Lazy Newb Pack, they definitely have those presets you saw before. But this is where I diverge a little bit, and I'll tell you why. So the first one is going to be not too crazy, but kind of crazy. So we're going to go all the way down here to these sort of skills. The first skill we're going to give them is Adequate Appraiser. This basically turns him into our trader dwarf. So whenever caravans arrive, he will be in charge of trading. Just because we have so few dwarves and limited resources, we're also going to give him a few, such as Record Keeper. We're just going to give him Novice because he won't keep that job forever. We basically just want him to be in charge of when we get there. So this will basically be in charge of keeping like stocks, like how many beds we have and how many blocks of certain types we have and that sort of thing. So we're definitely going to give him a little bit of that. We're also going to be including, let me browse through here, I believe Organizer. Organizer helps the leader of the there's some noble skills, and one of them is manager, which basically like approves work orders and that sort of thing, and it is governed, I believe, by the organizer skill. So this person is basically going to be the person in charge of the outpost when we get there. So we can always give him something else, like we can maybe toss some points into like Persuader, because it'll help us get better trade prices. But that's up to you. All of these other, like Negotiator, Liar, Intimidator, Judge of Intent, Conversationalist, Comedian, Flatterer, Console, blah, 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 blah. All of those basically have to do also with trade skills. They gain it by normal interactions with dwarves, like when they're drinking or whatever. But it also helps them get better prices or negotiate and keep better prices when you're in the trade menu. So you don't necessarily have to throw points into that if you have other ideas for it, but it's definitely something to consider. So this I wouldn't say is too crazy, but it is obviously a little bit out of the ordinary. But this next one is going to be very different, and I will tell you exactly why I'm doing this. So basically, what I'm going to do is give us an adequate diagnostician. That's point intensive. But anyways, so this... When you come to a dwarf fortress, you will eventually have a hospital for accidents that happen, like in training or in the war, or just someone will fall down a shaft, or there will be... there's always going to be something. Maybe a hunter accidentally shot somebody, something along those lines. But basically the idea is, in migration, you very rarely get a medical dwarf. So when actually migrants start showing up, chances are very good that they tend to not be a good dwarf, or not a good medical dwarf, and that can actually kill other dwarves because they can get infections. There are other things that govern that as well, including like clean water and that sort of thing. But like if the diagnostician makes the wrong call initially, it can affect and reduce the quality of the healthcare. If they're bad at like dressing the wound or being a surgeon or a bone doctor, basically all of those, just like in the real world, can basically affect the skills and affect getting the problem solved. So I'm basically saying, well, I want at least one good doctor. You might get a dwarf or two who maybe has like wound dresser or like bone doctor or surgeon, but diagnostician is the very important one. That's what the chief medical dwarf is ruled by. So the better the diagnostician, the better a chief medical dwarf they make, and the better shot they have at living, basically. But obviously it's kind of like archaic medicine, so infections can still kill and that sort of thing, which just sucks, especially when you have a legendary dwarf who dies of an infection but was saved after like a dragon bit off his arm or something. That can definitely happen, and it's a real Debbie Downer. If you want to move between these menus quickly, page up and page down will get you there. So some skills we're going to want are mason. Masons are basically the people who make things out of stone. Like if I wanted a stone door or a stone table, that will be governed by mason. So I'm not going to jump it up too much just because points are expensive and we're getting low. If I have some extra points after, I might throw it at some of these skills. So the other miner, we're going to want, let's give him building designer because that's important. We're just going to give him novice just so he does it. I don't want engraver, that's not necessarily very useful. And we'll give him Stonecrafter, why not? I chose Stonecrafter just because your first trade caravan, you're going to need something to sell, and crafts are basically the way to go, especially stone, because you'll tend to have a lot of it. So if you can make like stone toys, stone crafts, stone instruments, stone mugs, you can basically sell all of those, and that will get you some things you want on the first go around. So now we're at our woodcutter. The other skill I recommend for him is carpenter, just because you need someone to make your beds and your chairs and anything else you happen to need out of wood. So that's where those points will go. Adequate grower. So there's a lot of things that your grower can do. You can have them be a herbalist, which is or herbalist, depending on where you're from in the world, which means you can go out and like pick plants and basically get food that way. Not very recommended, but it's definitely a possibility. Brewer is sort of important. You don't necessarily need to be very good at it. And cook is kind of important, but not as important as many of the other crafts. So if you need to cut something out, you can definitely just have them start pretending to cook when they get there. For the first while, they'll just be eating straight whatever grows out of the ground. They'll just be eating it straight, just because growing or cooking actually uses a seed. So basically, a seed that you would have gotten from a plant is destroyed in the process of cooking. So I definitely do not recommend cooking right off the bat. And this is our fisherman, and to make a fisherman work, we need a fish cleaner, so we will give him that skill as well. And any other sort of additional skills, I would recommend giving to the fisherman, just because it's kind of like a ability that they can do at any sort of time. We might give him woodcrafter. In fact, I'm going to do... yeah, we'll give him woodcrafter, why not? Basically, because this is sort of like an extra guy, he doesn't have a ton to do. So, and you can always assign skills on them later if you happen to want them to do stuff. So, yeah, we will leave it there for now, because I have to go buy some other stuff in the items menu. But that's basically the general idea. So fish cleaner is basically the process of getting the fish prepped for eating, and woodcrafter, again, goes back to the having items to trade, and I want someone to be able to do that for us. So if we hit tab, we will go over to the items menu. This is everything you're bringing with you. This is how many of those items you're bringing with you, and this is the point value that they cost down here. So the 1 copper pick is worth 44 points. So if I wanted another one, I could definitely afford it, but it would chop into my what I've got. So picks are obviously for mining. Battle axes are for defense. Oh yes, a quick note. The reason why I didn't bring any military dwarves is because we are not settling anywhere where there's lots of wild beasts or evil things. I would definitely not recommend using this if you go to somewhere that's really savage or really evil in some way. You're going to want to be able to defend yourself. So you might want to bring an axe dwarf or something, and they have a few skills that denote their ability, sort of like the weapon skill, like axeman, denotes their ability with the actual axe. But things like fighter, like you might be able to swing the axe really well, but you don't necessarily know how to do that in context, so that's basically what fighter does. Wrestler and striker are sort of similar kind of things, like if you get into like a really close combat tussle sort of thing, how well they are able to get out of that. There's also things like dodger, how well they can dodge a blow. I would recommend, if you are going to bring a military dwarf, to look up these skills in Dwarf Fortress Wiki. They'll have a little bit more information about you, and they'll help you figure out which one you need. But basically, everything from Axeman down to Dodger are all of the combat skills, and I think there might be a few that are sprinkled in other places, but I would definitely check those out if you're intending on bringing a military dwarf. In fact, I would probably bring a crossbow dwarf, just so you can have the ability to hunt. So that would be my recommendation, but then you need bolts and that sort of thing. So here we have lots of food items. So plump helmets are basically a type of mushroom. Spawn is basically like the seed for it. We come with an anvil, some beer. Pigtails are basically like a type of like hemp, basically, where you can turn it into rope, or sort of like a thread, something that is very thread-like, or reeds, that sort of thing. So it comes into play for threads and cloth and that kind of thing. Cave wheat is basically obvious. It's a food item, but it's not necessarily a food item off of the bat like plump helmet is. It's basically used for making bread. Like, you have to mill it, and then you can either brew it or you then bake it into something else. So it's a little bit more of an advanced food source. Sweet pods are not a food source at all. You basically process them into a sugar, and from there you can turn them into a rum, or it can be used in foods. Rock nuts, kind of the same thing. You mill them and they turn into oil. They can be eaten straight, I believe, and then the oil can also be used for making soaps or food creation. Dimple cups, they are not used for food at all, which is kind of annoying. They're basically used as a dye, and I believe it's a blue colored dye. So that's what that is. This is basically food. Plump helmets, if you're new to the game, this is going to be something you want to bring with you as much as possible, either plump helmets or plump helmet spawns or both, just because they're the easiest to grow, they require the least amount of maintenance, and they're dwarves can just eat them right off out of the field. So all of these things will sort of be brought along. One thing I recommend bringing is one cat of either gender, never both. Wiki Catsplosion, and you'll see why. Basically because they've changed it a little bit, but cats would automatically associate with dwarves, and then you can't slaughter them. I know it sounds horrible, but it's pretty normal in Dwarf Fortress to slaughter animals that you have too much of, or that you don't like, or you don't want to take care of. And when you have cats breeding not round the clock, you tend to have a lot of kittens, and obviously if you have as many cats as you have dwarves, and you have 400 dwarves, it will crash your system, because it has to think about what these cats are doing, and what they want to do, and where they want to go, and how they move, like that next move item. So never have both genders of cats. Remember, Wiki Catsplosion if you want to know why. So we are going to bring a female cat, why not? And that will cost me 11 points. And then we will bring dogs, one of each gender, because we actually want puppies. Because dogs won't automatically associate with dwarves, so they can always be slaughtered. But we can also train them into war dogs and hunting dogs, and those are both have value basically as like a cheap shock unit, kind of, or just an assistance for hunting. Cats, they aren't necessarily as useful, but they kill vermin, and vermin can cause like food spoilage and that sort of thing. So now that we have those included, as you can see the prices over here, I have 39 points left. So we are going to include a few more plump helmets, a couple more pigtails, and a handful more of other things. These are all pretty self-explanatory, so we're still at 23. We'll bring a few beer types in case we can get a rollover and get another barrel, which would be pretty sweet. That's a little bit more of an advanced kind of thing, so we'll see if we can't throw any more points over here. Page up. Mason. Stonecrafter. Good. Okay, so let's jump back and we'll just spend it over here. So let's get the actual items rather than their raw, like, seed form, because growing stuff takes forever and we hate it. So we'll bring a handful of these, and then one, two. Okay, so we are at 0, so unless we want to sell off something to get more points, we're basically stuck. One thing you could do is you could sell off your iron anvil and then try and buy one in one of the caravans. It sort of depends on how quickly you think that you'll be able to get your metal works going. It's definitely an option, but if you're new to the game, I'd recommend just leaving it. But if you're a little bit more advanced, it's definitely an option if you want to try and bring like horses or something for breeding, that kind of thing. Because all of these are, obviously, they're more valuable because they have a higher meat value, they give leather, they give bones, all of which are useful. Okay, so in case you don't ever want to do this again, because as you can see it took some time, you can hit S to hit save. You can name the profile. I would recommend naming it something like Medical Dwarf, that sort of thing, basically to help you remember what the crap it is that you brought along that makes this important. Since I've already got it, I'm just going to abort, and we are going to embark. So I'm going to hit E, and we will end there. So this will roll over here in just a moment, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching, gamers, and we will see you here in the Dwarf Fortress Lazy Newb Pack next time. See you next time. I said that. Whatever.